For only the third time in 100 years, an incumbent senator has lost a primary election. The Trump-backed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton last night defeated four-term Senator John Cornyn in a runoff by nearly 28 points. The unsurprising result comes after Cornyn received nearly 32,000 more votes than Paxton in the March 3rd primary, but didn't meet the 50% threshold needed to win outright. Paxton then received President Trump's endorsement last week in a social media post where the president called him a MAGA warrior. The Texas AG spoke to his supporters last night after winning big.
We live in dangerous times, and that's exactly why I'll support our military and be ready to confront the threat from Communist China, which is our #1 geopolitical enemy. Just a few weeks ago, I helped establish the first ever detransition clinic in the country at Texas Children's Hospital. This will help kids reverse the damage caused by radical doctors who tried to transition them. And in the Senate, I will never back down from taking on the woke mob.
And with that, the general election is set. Paxton's now set to face Democratic candidate James Tallarico, who the Democratic Party now believes has a real opportunity to flip the seat this fall. We'll see. Democrats haven't won a Senate race in Texas since 1988, and they haven't won any statewide election there since 1994. It's going to be a slog. Joining us live from Texas, MS Now White House reporter Jake Traylor. Jake, thanks for getting up very, very early for us, especially after being at Paxton HQ last night. Just walk us through these results, because you and I did some reporting there in February, the first time that this race was on the ballot. Now seeing it again, were you hearing the same thing from Republican voters in the state? And was it really just as simple as Trump endorsed Paxton, so that's where I'm going if I'm a Republican?
Yeah, Ali, it's a great question, because reading through the lines, it does in a way feel as though it was that simple. I'd say we talked to dozens of, if not hundreds of voters yesterday walking out of polling locations in Plano, Texas, which is a little more Paxton territory, but still, I think Paxton said it in his victory speech last night. Trump's endorsement is the most powerful thing in politics. Those were Paxton's words, but that was really the effect we saw when we talked to voters yesterday. There were a handful of reasons folks on the ground were saying they were supporting Paxton, and it felt definitely more amplified than back in March in the initial race. There were a lot of conversations around wanting fresh blood in Washington, saying Cornyn had 4 terms to get something done and hadn't. But as we dug a little deeper in the conversations we were having with folks, the underlying through issue was that President Trump said so, and so they were supporting Paxton.
I just remember when I went down there, my entire theory of the case was, whose Republican Party is it? No better place to test that than Texas, where you've got the Bush dynasty of Republican politics now coming up against this undercurrent of MAGA and Trump. And obviously, we're seeing after this runoff election that it really ended up being Trump's party. But one of the reasons why it's going to end up being instructive in a general is because of who Ken Paxton is. So let's go through this when people talk about, OK, why is Ken Paxton someone that John Cornyn told me could be the kiss of death for Republicans? Let's go through this. During his time in office, Ken Paxton has been repeatedly accused of bribery, fraud, self-dealing, though he's never been convicted of a crime. Months after he took office in 2015, he was indicted on 2 counts of securities fraud. In 2020, a group of aides reported him to the FBI, accusing him of bribery and abuse of office to help a friend and political donor. Then in 2023, he was sued by the State Bar of Texas for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, campaigned in a lot of election denialism when I was down on the ground in Texas. In 2024, after 9 years and several legal delays in the securities fraud case, Paxton finally settled that, agreeing to a $271,000 fine and community service. Then in 2025, an investigation by the AP found that Paxton claimed 3 homes as his primary residence, allowing him to save tens of thousands of dollars in loan payments, but he's never faced legal action for it. And then, Jake, it's nothing to say of the way that he and his wife got divorced, his wife filing for divorce on biblical grounds. That was certainly something that grabbed headlines. And all of it amounts to, do the scandals matter in the minds of voters or don't they?
Yeah, Ali, I mean, that right there, I think, just compiling a list of what an embattled candidate. And as I talked to folks yesterday that were voting, they acknowledged it. I mean, we talked about all the ad money that came in from outside. Cornyn well outraised Paxton, and a lot of that was outside money that was specifically targeted at just highlighting for folks how embattled Ken Paxton was. Folks were aware of it yesterday. It just wasn't their top priority. But this is what I'd say. I kept having to remind myself who would be the people showing up to vote in a runoff like this yesterday. I knew a lot of very magnified individuals that were showing up saying this was a race they wanted to show up and support Paxton for. I'm born and raised in Texas. I have tons of friends and family and friends of friends from across the state who also just didn't show up to vote yesterday because maybe they were going to support Cornyn, but they weren't that excited to go out and vote. When we're talking about a general election now, there are tons of moderates that maybe are a part of the Republican Party that sat out voting yesterday that are very fearful and not excited to support Paxton. And so we have now an entirely different race now that we're talking about a Talarico Paxton, because there are a lot of unanswered questions about Paxton's really confusing and controversial past.
I think that's absolutely right. And it's also, again, why Senator Cornyn said to me when I was on the ground there that he thinks that Paxton could be the kiss of death for Republicans. And it also presents the idea of what Cornyn said last night in his concession speech, where he basically said the people who come out and vote get to speak for those who chose not to be a part of this process. And certainly that is one of the things that you can reason from these election results. And I wonder, as you talk to your Republican sources, did they see this primary, which was really nasty, as a drain on resources? Do they worry that they are going to have to spend more money in Texas now trying to make up the ground that Paxton has to make up here? I mean, what are you hearing from people?
I mean, 100% yes. We're working on a story right now that will come out hopefully either today or tomorrow, just compiling how much there are some MAGA Republican donors, folks inside the White House, folks close to Trump or familiar with the White House that are saying, okay, this is a difficult candidate to really get behind here because there are, if not a lot of skeletons in the closet, a lot of skeletons out of the closet that now we have to talk about and make sense of. And we know that the Talarico campaign is, of course, going to jump on really quickly. And so there's a lot of conversations happening right now. This was something folks saw coming, but also Trump's 11th hour endorsement was really interesting. I was talking with folks inside the White House, very familiar with the midterm strategy, that said they didn't think Trump was going to actually make the endorsement. He was going to kind of let this thing play out on its own separately and not get behind Paxton. That's certainly not the case here now. The president has clearly come out in support of Paxton, and now Republicans are kind of forced to coalesce around him, and that's going to be a really challenging thing to do.
I agree with you. I thought it was interesting that he ultimately did choose to endorse, given the fact that people like John Thune and folks around him in Republican leadership were saying Cornyn is actually our guy. We think that he is the more electable candidate in this instance. So, again, it all leads us to a fascinating general election in a state that Democrats have been really salivating over the chance to potentially flip a seat. Again, it's going to be a long shot. But one of the things that helps them is that this comes as President Trump's disapproval rating is now at the highest it's ever been, according to a new average of polls. According to Real Clear Politics, which averages all the major polls, Trump's disapproval rating now sits at 58.3%. That number previously got as high as 57.6% shortly after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So, again, it gives you a sense of where we are right now, Jake. And I wonder, the thing that struck me and that I keep in mind in Texas is that when I was down there in February, voters were talking to me about national issue sets. They were talking to me about immigration. They were talking to me about the president and the role that he plays. I imagine that they were talking to you about cost of living and Iran, which has happened since I was down there. The issue set feels so national, and maybe Trump's coattails are too. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And it's so good sometimes getting out of the D.C. bubble and just plugging in with folks that
always
were at the polls yesterday, because so many folks, especially those that are supporting President Trump, I'll say this, are making the connection of saying, okay, the war, maybe they believe that the war had to happen, as the president has said, because he believes they had access to nuclear capabilities. But they're also internally experiencing their own struggle and wrestle right now. I had multiple Trump supporters to me say yesterday, okay, yes, we believe what Trump did maybe initially was right with Iran, but this has gone on too long. Our gas prices are getting too high. Our grocery prices are getting too high. I just talked to a couple White House officials yesterday in the aftermath of this win about the president's just strange focus over the past couple of weeks on a lot of things that are everything but what Americans are concerned about. Not so much about affordability, but instead focus on a ballroom, focus on this DOJ, a $1.8 billion fund, focus on different construction projects. That White House official told me, we've learned we cannot corral or control the president's language or messaging. All we can do is focus on kind of curbing some of that damage. And so right now, I think coming out of the White House, there's a clear juxtaposition of messaging where you have a lot of cabinet officials and top senior folks talking about and trying to message on affordability, especially heading into midterms. But that doesn't really seem to be where President Trump's focus is on.
Yeah, on UFC fights, on slush funds for January 6th insurrectionists, and on an Iran war that he's having trouble figuring out what the end of it actually looks like. MS Now White House reporter Jake Traylor, grab some Whataburger, get on a plane, come back here. Thank you.